Forget Melrose Place. This is Marvel's Place. Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories, the melodrama, and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me. I do have swooped dark hair, so I'm going to be Guido, aka Wiccan. Guido Kaplan, I'll go for.
So, does that make me your Hulkling?
You are blonde and broad, so it works. I don't know how we haven't covered this for a Halloween costume before.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I
Yeah.
saw a great Wiccan and Hulkling at New York Comic Con. I think that I posted on our Instagram, but I would imagine it's just going to become a even more popular costume in the coming years.
I wonder why, but we're not going to spoil that just yet.
Well, before we get into today's episode, what's new in our little section of the multiverse, Guido?
Halloween season has passed, and while we covered
Ooh,
but it lives in our hearts forever.
That's true.
And while
That's true.
we covered a lot of witches, including Agatha and Zatanna, this episode isn't explicitly Agatha, but in our final segment, we are going to talk a little bit about Agatha, and we'll give you a warning if you haven't finished the series yet, but only in our final segment because we are excited to dig into something maybe related to Agatha. No spoilers.
And if you're joining us for the first time, we have three parts of our journey through the multiverse today: origins of the story, exploring multiversity, and pondering possibility. So thanks for coming along.
And remember, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening, and visit dearwatchers.com to check out our back catalog of 145 other episodes you can listen to.
And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 146, and let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with our travels to today's alternate universe. Today, we are punching through various multiverses to answer the burning question, what if the multiversal Wiccan, Billy Kaplans, and the rest of the Young Avengers were pulled in to fight one mega battle to prevent a dimensional takeover?
Yes, very simple and straightforward. And we have covered the Young Avengers once before, back on episode 84. So go back and listen to What If the Runaways Became the Young Avengers, where we also cover the first arc and creation of the Young Avengers team. The Earths that we cover today in this storyline are not so clean. The only numbered Earth we spend substantial time on is Earth 212, which as New Yorkers is quite fun, and it's numbered, of course, after the New York area code.
Gosh,
But
I didn't
our
get
focus...
that, but I love it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I cannot believe that. Our focus is on the multiversal variants that come out of the story, so more on that once we dive in.
We are going to share backgrounds in our first segment this episode, so let's punch a star through the dimensional barrier in our short shorts and throw out a curse word and go into our next segment.
Right now on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
So we don't have origin issues today since our main story covers origins in the 616 and multiversal dimensional hopping. So instead, let's dive into the team and focus here, the Young Avengers. So Guido, what was your background with this team? I know you mentioned we talked about them before on the podcast.
Yeah, I love them. I love them actually probably primarily because of this run. I read the original run and enjoyed it. They have a surprisingly small number of appearances, and I think this run, this iteration of the team, is even more iconic than the initial one, and I'm excited to talk about it and dig into it. But surprisingly, this is pretty much it. We've now read the vast majority of their solo series. They have a lot of spin-offs where they'll show up in events. There will be like single issues, but this is it, shockingly. And I'm sure that's going to change because I'm sure we're going to see them on screen one day, and I'm sure they're going to want to relaunch them yet again. But so my background is that I've read them from the very beginning, their creation in 2006. I've read them, been a fan if not from then certainly from this series, and look forward to anything they're ever in. What about you? I think you probably hadn't even heard of them really until we covered them.
I think the first time I really heard about them was when some speculation around the characters being on screen and some of their on-screen versions being there. And then I think the only other thing I've ever read of them was when we covered them on the podcast. And I'm really surprised to hear that they haven't been continuous, because I thought, with the obvious kind of very long build up with their on-screen appearances and seeing these characters, that we would also have at the same time an ongoing comic. But so I'm surprised that that's not happening.
Yeah, and I don't know why it is, honestly. It's an interesting thing to me. There are lots of similar teams in the sense that they're like collections of young characters. So I feel like we've, over the last 10 years, seen a lot of actually Champions series more than Young Avengers. And some of the Young Avengers characters end up in Champions. But it is very strange to me that this team has disbanded. A few of the members ended up on an iteration of the West Coast Avengers, which was really fun. And then otherwise, people like Wiccan and Hulkling we're seeing in other stuff, or certainly big events like Empire, they show up. But there is just not a book that you can go to for these characters, or even for this dynamic, because I think what's cool about it, and this is getting a little bit into the story we're going to cover in our next segment, but I know that Kieron Gillen, when he wrote this volume, said that he feels like the first volume of Young Avengers was covering life at like 15, 16, and he wanted to get into life at like 18, 19, 20 and sort of grow them up a little. And all of the other young hero-based books, I think, tend to skew younger. So like Champions, anything Miss Marvel's in, it tends to skew younger. And I love it, and that's fine. But like these characters are, like you said, like Melrose Place, 90210. Like these characters have relationships and have conflict, and I think that's what's really fun about them. And I'm not sure why this book doesn't exist, because there is a place for it even alongside all those other books. It's unclear to me.
In some ways, it feels like it's harkening back to the early days of some of the iconic characters like Spider-Man, and maybe to a lesser extent the X-Men, where you have characters who are 17, 18, 19, 20 in that age range, and we're following them in high school. There's some of the melodrama there, and it's almost a way of injecting that back into Marvel now that those characters have been sliding time scaled up into their later 20s or early 30s or however old they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and the book is very X-Men. I think that's why I like it so much, because it's colorful characters like living their lives, where the action plots are backgrounded and the foreground is really these characters and what they're dealing with and how they're dealing with each other. And so it is very reminiscent of X-Men. And X-Men obviously has, over the generations, continually introduced new young characters, so can always have that young soap opera feel. But I still don't know why this book doesn't persist. But it's good because it means it's digestible.
Yeah, and it's almost giving me, we just recently covered the Ultimates universe, and I don't know if you agree, but it's almost doing a little bit of what the Ultimates is, in that it's giving us alternate versions of these characters. I mean, not in the same, like, 1-to-1 ratio, but you kind of
but I think you're right. Like, there's aspects of the character. You've got, obviously, Wiccan, who's like the Scarlet Witch, and you've got Speed, who's like Quicksilver, and you've got Hawkeye, Kate Bishop, who's obviously Hawkeye. You've got, I mean, in this run, you've got America. I'd say America doesn't really have a comparison point, nor does Prodigy, but Hulkling is sort of, Super Skrull's never a member of the Avengers, but sort of Super Skrull / Hulk-ish.
Even Wicked and Hulkling's relationship, you can see the Vision and Scarlet Witch just in the fact that, like, well, he's a robot and he's an alien kind of thing, but there's still like that kind of dynamic between them being different than the Scarlet Witch Wiccans version, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think the Young Avengers are a really fun team, and I'm glad when we get to cover them, though this is going to be one of our final opportunities to cover them until more material comes out from them. So, yeah.
Well, let's dive deeper into this, well, not issue, I was going to say many issues.
Omnibus, in fact. You read your first omnibus cover to cover for an episode.
But this is a tiny omnibus.
It is a tiny omnibus.
Where it is like an old phone book. This is just a little bit bigger. But let's explore some multiversity.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
So we are asking the question, what if multiversal Wiccans / Billy Kaplans and the rest of the Young Avengers were pulled in to fight one mega battle to prevent a dimensional takeover? And this is basically the Young Avengers by Gillen and McKelvie omnibus, which covers the covers the teaser in Marvel Now .1 plus Young Avengers Volume 2 issues 1 through 15. That's a lot of words.
Yeah. So basically it's Young Avengers Volume 2, the entire run. These are almost entirely written by Kieron Gillen. The main story is, there's one exception I'll mention in a moment, they're almost entirely drawn by Jamie McKelvie with Mike Norton, colored by Matt Wilson, lettered by Clayton Cowles, one mid-run issue as a guest artist, and the final 2 issues are little vignettes by different teams with Kieron and Jamie doing the wraparound of it as it concludes and puts a little pin in the characters. So I think for this one, since it's a long story and there's a lot to it, including the multiversal piece at the center, we'll walk through a summary together and we can stop along the way to talk about our impressions. So why don't you kick our summary off?
Okay. Wiccan, in an attempt to bring back Hulkling's dead mother, it always comes down to dead mothers, doesn't it?
Well, this one there's a lot of dead parents in this one.
That's true. There are a lot. Well, Wiccan accidentally lets an interdimensional parasite called Mother, masquerading as Hulkling's mother, that's a lot of times I said mother there in one sentence, into the world. The parasite's arrival had been a consequence of Loki's manipulations, who wanted to subsequently pose as an ally to Billy and ultimately control him, as Wiccan was destined to become the omnipotent demiurge. Unaware of the full extent of Loki's intentions, Wiccan and Hulkling allied themselves with the trickster to escape Mother.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes manipulations happening there that we don't really kind of find out until a bit later in the story, really.
No, but you get the kickoff. The reason Marvel Now .1 was so important as a teaser is because it's where Loki first reveals that Wiccan has this destiny. And it's such a classic, like, sci-fi fantasy trope, right? Mm. There's this destiny that someone's trying to avoid that could happen on this earth. It's almost like a Terminator type thing, or any of these stories where, in that case, he's telling America, like, you need to stop Wiccan because he's going to become the demiurge. And we don't have any idea what that means just yet.
And Wiccan and Billy's actions, it reminded me a bit of Peter Parker's in the most recent Spider-Man movie, where he's trying to do something to help his friends and the spell goes wrong. So there's elements of that. I wonder even if they borrowed some elements from that movie, since it also involves magic. I mean, there's a lot of things into that movie.
There's a lot of things in this series that I think are borrowed, including through to Agatha All Along. But your point actually leads us to the next chunk of our summary, because Loki interferes with the spell, which then ties the spell to Wiccan Hulkling and starts to bring back dead parents under Mother's influence. And then America shows up. She gets tied into the spell. So it's a cool premise. What this does is bring in all these other characters who become infected by this link to the spell, and that is the reformation of the Young Avengers. So at this point, we have the new team created and bound up essentially by this. Kate Bishop joins. We don't see her mother, but she talks about the possibility of fighting her mother, which is fun. Kate is with Novar, Marvel Boy, so she brings him along. We have Wiccan and Hulkling and Kid Loki already there. So, and then America is the one who comes in with Loki. We see her parents. So it's a fun explanation, I think, for the team to assemble, if you will. Because as you probably recall from the first one, these are only some of the same characters. So OG what Young Avengers here are only Kate Bishop, Wiccan, and Hulkling.
Mm-hmm. And Kieron Gillen is pretty much of the right age to, I feel like, been influenced by things like The Faculty and Disturbing Behavior. I was kind of getting that feel. There was all those movies in the 90s and early aughts where like the parents are aliens or the parents are possessed by something. And
doing it as the
lives.
parents, it's fun. And there's the fun aspect too. We didn't include this in the summary, but where adults can't tell that mother is corrupting the other adults. So every time the Young Avengers try to get the Avengers involved, they're just like, you kids are just fighting with your parents, like work it out.
Yeah.
And they can't because they're like blinded through this magic or whatever to this fact. So it's a really good setup in that sense of like, it's literally kids against the world, which becomes important to the way they resolve the conflict in the end. But at this point, it's just they're on their own. They're fighting their parents. Their parents are evil. It's also Buffy, right? Like
totally
the famous John Ritter episode, of course, where he's the evil stepfather and he turns out to be actually an evil robot. So all of that, the metaphor becoming real is great.
Well, in the next 3 months, Loki trained Billy to prepare him to fight Mother, with the ultimate motivation, though, of gaining his trust. The Young Avengers were joined by Prodigy, who informed them Speed had been kidnapped by a strange entity dressed as Patriot.
Right, original member who was thought dead.
Yeah, and he just keeps saying, like, TikTok, which actually reminded me of, not TikTok, the platform, but actually reminded me of the season of Watchmen, where they keep using, like, on HBO, where they keep using, like, TikTok. And he's got the same kind of very, like, foreboding, masked look here, too. Well, the Young Avengers chased the entity through the multiverse and were brought to Mother's dimension, which is a really cool, like, all-white box. It's, like, a very neat design.
Yeah, I want to talk about the design more because there's meta aspects to it that I love.
There are. So they escaped, but accidentally left Prodigy and Hulkling behind, using numerous evil alternate versions of themselves as a distraction. The Young Avengers distracted Mother and saved Hulkling and Prodigy. So there's lots of like mini little fights going on throughout this. We kind of keep it keeps the momentum going by bringing our heroes and our antagonists back together, and then our heroes escape again. It's got a very flow, push and pull kind of element.
Well, because it's being paced over 13 issues. The 14 and 15 are just an epilogue. So I suspect, too, this series would have gone longer, but probably got prematurely canceled. And so I don't think that shows in the pacing. I don't think there's anything bad about it, but I just suspect Kieron could have actually gone much further with this story and had to wrap it up fast. But so this is the core of our multiversal part of the story. So we can stop here before we get to the resolution and talk a little bit about the design, because there's an aspect of it I love. And all these characters that show up on panel, which is really fun. I don't know if you studied those pages, but we don't sadly get to meet a lot of these characters, but they're pulling in, because in those 3 months, we have like a training montage page where they go to all these different Earths. And we also hear like that they ended up at some Earths with bunnies. And then there's some Earth where you see Thor's skeleton corpse. Like you have no idea what's going on, but they go to all these different Earths. And then in the end, they pull all these characters in to fight Mother. And there's like a vampire Wiccan. I don't know if you noticed him. There's like a demon-possessed
devil Wiccan
Wiccan,
too, yeah.
like a devilly one. Yeah, so there's like all different versions of themselves, and I think that's a really fun thing to play here. I kind of wish we saw some of those characters, but it's fun nonetheless.
Well, going again back to, did this influence the movies? I was definitely getting very much a multiverse of madness feel, where they hop to all the different dimensions and you see variations on Doctor Strange and all of them, and also some of the worlds where in that also it's like they can have a bit of fun injected into the story, which is the same thing here in terms of some of the worlds are like very wacky and others are more serious.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's also, what's cool about it is that it is also prior to obviously any of the Spider-Verse movies.
Oh yeah, that
And it's
too.
it's very much in line with all of those. I mean, I guess there's just this, I guess in some ways this is a trope, but here's what's cool. Even the Spider-Verse comics don't debut until 2014. And so this series is before even Spider-Verse is put into comics. So it is neat. I mean, at this point, 2012 and 13, like it doesn't quite feel like multiversal storytelling in this way was so commonplace. And yet I love that they just roll it in here and don't feel the need to explain it or link it to some big event. Like they just give us multiversal Young Avengers, and that's that. So it's fun, and it makes sense that it's coming from Kieron Gillen. So the other thing that I love that he does here is make it a little meta. I mean, first of all, I don't know if you paid attention to like the credits pages every issue, but they're really meta. They're like in-world pieces of paper for different things, or they start to become in-world like Twitter or blogs of people recapping things.
Yes.
But then some of them are like flyers for parties or bands. And then I really love the last one, which actually looks like MCU credits. So we can talk about that at the end, but it's a fun detail in that final one. But I also love in Mother's Dimension, she starts to be able to like pull what we see as the panels. And a few times, like she or Loki notoriously can break the fourth wall when it comes to the idea that he's in a story. And that's really cool. And I love storytelling like that, as our regular listeners know. But here it's cool when Mother like grabs the narration caption boxes and is like pulling them down and then like bleeding them into ink. It's a really cool way. And her dimension being blank white, like really puts her sort of outside of reality. She's like a meta villain almost. And so our existence is incorporated into her reality, which is always fun when creators are able to pull that off, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And I think also because they do so much with color, like there's such a bright pop of color in the book in general. So when you go to Mother's Dimension and there's this absence of color and it's all white, I think it really stands out there. And also because it's pretty busy, there's this team, as we just mentioned, there's all these multiversal versions that come in. So then when you get to that dimension and it's kind of this void, I think, again, it just makes it that much more pronounced.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So good. I mean, not a surprise here. Kieron and Jamie worked together a lot, both before and after this. So obviously their collaboration, I'm sure, is really easy and certainly produces incredible work. But it is cool when art and everything and colors. I mean, Matt Wilson has worked with Jamie McKelvie, but also does Russell Dodderman's work. Matt Wilson does incredible coloring. So all of it really is just fits together to tell a great story. So let's continue with our story. Because back on 616, Hulkling has left the team trying to figure out if he really loved Wiccan or if Wiccan was possibly warping reality, even unconsciously, which is a really fun question. And again, I think one of the many elements in this that surely exists in like WandaVision or Agatha, like just this question of reality and in WandaVision, so I'm spoiling nothing about Agatha just yet. In WandaVision, like, it's not clear that Wanda even knows the extent to which her power has constructed this reality around her. And so it's neat to see that question in here. Hulkling sort of grappling with having this reality warping boyfriend. Could it be that they're not actually in love? And of course, there's like all the melodrama with Prodigy, who Prodigy's a former X-Men. Prodigy's bisexual and comes out as bi, tries to make out with Hulkling, like all fun drama in this. But back to the action, we have Leah, who's a Loki character that he had relegated to the dimension of hell, who allies with Mother and is the one who's giving Hulkling therapy, quote unquote, but actually gets Hulkling back to New York City because geographic proximity to parents is what triggers the spell. And so now Mother can come back into the dimension to unleash. Now she has all of the evil versions of the Young Avengers under her command and is going to now bring them into our Earth 616 as a fight.
Mm-hmm. Now, not to put you on the spot, but had Leah been a character that was introduced already? Because
yes.
I wasn't.
Not in Young Avengers, but yes. A lot of Loki's, because Kieron Gillen wrote Journey into Mystery with Loki, a lot of Loki's story gets told in here. So that's why there's some Loki stuff that you wouldn't know if you didn't follow Loki's character.
For me, as an outside reader coming in, that was one of the only things where it was like, okay, pause. Who is this, or why is she doing all these other things? It felt like an extra character that was added halfway through. But I'm sure if I was coming in with a knowledge of who she was and Loki's whole story, I wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's continue with our story, because since Billy was still too weak to end the spell which had brought Mother, Loki suggested that he would be able to do this if his body was older, thus making Wiccan age him into a young adult. Unfortunately, Loki's powers didn't remain. The trickster had to resort to a second plan to turn Wiccan temporarily into the Demiurge. Prodigy called all of the teenage heroes available to fight the army of alternate Young Avengers, while the real Young Avengers took care of Mother. So this is our big, like, MCU battle royale ending here, or almost.
Yeah, and it's fun. I mean, you probably barely recognized 5% of them, but they pull out some really fun young people, like the members of the Power Pack are in there. You probably did recognize some of the Runaways joined the team.
Oh, I didn't even see them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's cool because, again, since the setup is that the adults can't tell what's happening, they have to find all of the young heroes who can join them while they're continuing this battle. So it is a cool epic battle. But then again, Jamie McKelvie and Kieron Gillen's extraordinary storytelling and interest in like soap opera, it backgrounds it, which is almost even more MCU feeling, I think. Mm-hmm. So there's this whole epic battle, and you only get a handful of panels of the epic battle because mostly you're getting the conversations in between the epic battle, or the, of course, deal with now Wiccan being Demiurge and what that means. And so it's such a cool story construction, I think, and balance of things here. So while it's a cool epic battle, it's not like the whole focus of the comic is this epic battle at all.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I thought was really clever was aging Loki up as part of the story, because it really felt like, okay, now they're probably solving some problem that they needed to solve. Almost maybe like I could even see them being told by editorial, it's like, okay, we can't have Loki as a kid anymore. He's got to be like a young adult.
Also, again, this is 2013, so we now know that Tom Hiddleston is like taking over in people's hearts and minds. So I'm sure MCU influence could have played a role here in terms of like, you know what? Let's have a Loki that looks a little bit more like Tom Hiddleston than a little kid.
Yeah, but it was so clever that they were able to make that such a part of the story that Loki can't tap into all of his powers because he is this little kid form and he needs to get aged up. And it was very much like, oh, I could see that being like, put a writer in a corner, give them restrictions, and let them have fun with it, and they're going to come up with a creative solution that works within the overall story.
Yeah, I agree. So let me wrap up the story and then we can talk about it overall. So the Young Avengers are facing Mother. Billy tries to tap into the power of the Demiurge, but fails once Loki has freed Hulkling. Hulkling goes to comfort Billy, and it's a kind of a really touching moment I found where he says love is like this overwhelming magic that warps your reality. So whether or not it's Wiccan's powers without his awareness or not, like yes, of course there's magic at play in the love that they feel. And so it's a nice touching moment. This reunion means that Billy can finally achieve his full potential, destroys Mother, gets rid of all the alternate Young Avengers, and then we have our final 2 issues, which are New Year's Party and all the other heroes, and a series of character beats that sort of wrap them up at this point and where they are and where they're going. So that is Young Avengers Volume 2. So overall, how did you enjoy reading this? This was a longer read for us.
Yeah, but I really enjoyed it. I think in part because they do a great, and I think it makes sense because, as you said, the writer and artist are working together a lot because there's a great symbiosis between the dialogue and the visuals. Like sometimes when you tell me, oh my gosh, we're gonna read a lot, it's like, oh, there's a lot of reading. But here they keep the actual dialogue pretty succinct, and they also then let it, being comics, being a visual medium, do a good amount of the storytelling as well. So in that way, even though it's a lot of issues, it felt like a really quick read to me.
Yeah, for sure. And that comes down to pacing too, which for sure has to do with the art and story, but also just Kieron Gillen's writing, I think, is so fantastic. Mm-hmm. You just get swept away in it.
Maybe because like Agatha was on my mind too, but it had a very mini-series TV show kind of pacing, which I'm sure are also taking influence from comics. So I think I'm seeing it in both. But did you feel like, oh, I get like a TV show element out of this?
Yeah. Again, I think that's a credit to him because I suspect, I don't know for sure, but his letter in the final issue makes me think that story could have gone on for longer and it got canceled. So that's why it's such a credit to him that he was able to make it feel like it wasn't rushed. And maybe they told him by issue 6, like, you know what, we're only letting you go to 15. So he was able to really plot it out. But I agree. It's like well plotted. There's you take little divergences. Like there's the issue with Prodigy and Tommy. And so you're sort of seeing where they are and how they enter the story. You know that Kate Bishop and Nova are together at the beginning, but you actually they don't come to Earth until like the 3rd or 4th issue. So it is constructed in the way that you're describing, I can see, with all the pieces moving around the board.
Yeah, I think the only things that I could see maybe that it was rushed was the stuff with Tommy and the stuff with like the Patriot figure that's appearing. Because Tommy does kind of magically reappear at the end. So I think that could be maybe the only thing I could see. Oh, maybe they were going to play that out again because he just does kind of like reappear.
Well, and the whole Demiurge thing. So we don't actually find out the Demiurge thing. It's a few years later, Al Ewing, so a different writer, actually picks it up and then pays it off. I don't think it's that great. We could read it at some point because there is a multiversal piece of it. But yeah, I suspect that would have been, if this book went on for 30, 40 issues, I think Kieron Gillen would have gotten to tell all those stories. So I agree. Things are rushed, but it doesn't feel bad because the story is just so well executed and the characters are so great.
Well, I think the characters are a big part of it because I think they play so well off of each other. They all fall into kind of their archetypes without it feeling like they are a stereotype. And I think especially like the character of Loki has so much great dialogue and lines. And even the point where he says once he gets aged up, oh, I can actually help in the battles now and not just kind of being like the comic relief character off to the side, which he very much is through a lot of it. But that really keeps the story going.
Yeah. Now, before we move on from this story, we have to conclude with the fact, and this feels a little Agatha-esque, no spoilers, but this is the queerest team ever there was. And I love that, of course, Kieron Gillen realizes that, is doing it on purpose, I'm sure. And in the end, like, there's even the meta moments commenting on it where Kate Bishop is like, am I the only straight person on this team? And I love America's response to her, which of course is, Princess, I've been seeing the way you've looked at me. So I don't know about that. But it's great because these are some of them newly queer, like Prodigy newly being bisexual, but some of them long established, like America and Wiccan and Hulkling. So it is so fun. Loki even putting the moves on Prodigy in the end and saying, like, in his conception of sexuality, like, it has nothing to do with the identities people have today. So really fun queer book.
Well, ahead of its time in that way, too, because it feels like this is something that's only now starting to really come into pop culture, into comics culture, especially, and into the things like MCU. But for then, it feels like it was so much like, I don't know, such a Gen Z kind of feel there in terms of like embracing queerness that is only now really becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it just takes someone who is really tapped into identity and how people function. He's written tons of queer stories, is queer identified, and but what's cool is, like you're saying, I mean, he's older than I am. He's squarely Gen X while I live on the border, and is still writing this thing that feels like in 2024 it would be a story we'd see. Even in terms of the presence of, I mean, social media doesn't play a role in the story, but like he uses it in the story, both for the recap pages, but then in the end, like they're taking a picture and Loki's posting it online on the phone. And so, yeah, he just, I don't know, he does a fantastic job of making stories that feel really accessible and timeless, and was definitely ahead of his time. I suspect because he was, I guess, powerful enough at this point, or Young Avengers was so under the radar that it didn't matter at this point. So it's hard to say like why this was allowed to happen when we have things like Marvel Pride covers showing allies and not putting the rainbow flag on them. So it's like, how 10 years ago was this story able to be told? But it probably just was under the radar enough that it
I think that's the good thing about probably
editorial
working with these characters that are not the Avengers and having them
true.
like you have that place to explore, and that's again what's reminded me of the Ultimates or anything like that. It's I guess the good thing about having these other kind of secondary characters, like it's actually much more room to experiment.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm sure we've talked about on the show over the years, because I remember a lot of the 80s now legends, even like Chris Claremont used to say, and Louise Simonson and all those folks, they loved getting put on the books that were going to be canceled and weren't selling well because no one cared about them. So that's where we got like Ditko's Doctor Strange, Claremont's X-Men. Like we got these extraordinary things because they were books where it was just like, all right, let's put that person on it and leave it alone. Who cares? So it is cool. I don't think that exists anymore, though. I think this is sadly what like people talk about with IP becoming too valuable, where I just don't think there's a book at this point. I don't think there's a book Marvel's putting out that they're not thinking, all right, can we turn this into a multi-billion-dollar franchise? So I don't, even though there's books that don't sell as well clearly than others, I don't know that they're letting total experimentation happen. But that's the cynical view. So hopefully I'm wrong.
I think that's true, but I think probably in like the independents you probably do see it a lot more because I'm
of course,
sure
and that's why so many of these creators, Kieron Gillen included, go to creator owned and Image and other small companies where they can do that kind of experimentation. So really fun multiversal story, but we've got one more segment to explore.
Yeah, so let's wrap up by pondering some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted?
So, Guido, what are we talking about for our pondering possibilities? Do you have a whole nother omnibus that I have to read?
No, just the opposite. I have 9 hours of a TV show for you to watch, and poof, like
watched,
that.
so that's
magic. You've watched it. So we are going to talk about the MCU on screen. If you haven't seen Agatha All Along, it is important to this conversation, though it's not exclusively what we're talking about, because I want to talk about all the Young Avengers. But Agatha All Along through the finale is about to get spoiled. So if you haven't watched it and care, then pause and come back to this segment after you do. Because we get Billy in full Wiccan costume.
Yes.
So that is it. That is the most exciting thing. And obviously all of us who are big fans loved that moment. But now that you are reading more Wiccan, like, how do you feel about it? What does this series make you think about the debut of Wiccan?
Yeah, well,
obviously, hold on. First off, Kit Connor needs to be Hulkling, right? We're done. We got that resolved. Everyone can agree.
I think Wiccan as a character, what I was getting from this Young Avengers and what I think they got from the Agatha TV show is that he is a character that kind of needs to exist in conjunction with another character. I don't know if you agree, but like he's like America Chavez here is like brimming with personality. I didn't get Wiccan from reading.
Oh my God. I love her so much.
Huh?
I love her so much. She's
I love
America.
I love her, but I know. But
yeah.
Do you think like Wiccan? He seems a little more pulled back. So I feel like you need someone like the Teddy or Agatha, someone who he can then play off of. Or do you agree in that way?
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense, and I think it's what Joe Locke gives us. Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons I think so many people like myself can't see anyone but Kit Connor being Teddy is because that sort of is Heartstopper too, right? Like Charlie is a little emo, and we're in his interior world as the protagonist, but as a character, like, he's not super dynamic. He's not boring by any means, but he's not dynamic. And I think that's true for Billy too. Now, of course, Agatha leaves us with Billy having a quest. And so, like, Billy has motivation, Billy has things to do, but I agree. I think Billy will be a great member of a fully formed team, which is where I hope we're going.
Yeah, I agree. I could not help but picture Kit in this role. I'm super curious. As I think I've said to you offline, I think it's like, it would be a little weird to cast him just because, as far as we know, they're not in an actual relationship. So it's like casting someone who played your boyfriend on another TV series. I don't know. It sounds a little
I feel like it's
me.
been done before, but I feel like maybe even in Golden Age Hollywood, I feel like it was done.
Well, if they were like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, or two people who were like...
Well, no, but that was a real relationship. I'm saying people would play like a couple repeatedly. I feel like that's happened before. Or look at the Brat Pack. They're a good example of people who played couples repeatedly, but weren't couples in real life. So it's possible. I can still hold out hope. But we have Patriot. We have Kate Bishop. We now have Wiccan. We have America. And one thing I appreciate is that I also want Kieron Gillen's America Chavez. And now that they've made us wait a few years, we can get it, because the America that debuts in Multiverse is meant to be much younger and a kid. Yes. And now, like, a few years have passed. So now she can be 16 or 17. She can curse and be sassy, and like she can play that role. And I hope that they have her do that because it's a really fun role. She is the like badass one on the team, and I did not get that from the Multiverse of Madness portrayal. But I think you're right. I think maybe a few years go, and you can even have something
that they can even say in the MCU, oh, such and such happened during the time in between, or she was searching for her mom's, and like, so, and she had all these other adventures that have kind of hardened her as a character. So I think I'd love to kind of see this America on the screen. I agree, because for me, she's so much of the glue that really binds this team together.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And then I don't know, like one character, I don't know if we'll get like a younger Loki. I don't think they'll go that route in the MCU. And obviously he's not in OG Young Avengers. The other OG Young Avenger is Iron Lad, which of course is a Kang variant. I don't know if we're going to get that. So yeah, and then we do have Cassie Lang. So she also has debuted in the MCU. She is OG Young Avengers. As they allude to in this series, she dies between the first volume of Young Avengers and this one. It's what makes them stop being a team. And so we have her. So we have more than enough people. I'm sure they'll put Miss Marvel on the team. We have more than enough people and we're ready.
Having a Loki kind of character, maybe it's not Loki, but having that kind of character where you don't know if you want to trust him and he's very sarcastic, like that also brings so much to the team. I think like him and America together were the ones that really popped for me. So I would love to see, if it's not Loki, is there another character that they could introduce or someone else that they could kind of bring in that has that same like, okay, you're here, but we don't know if we really trust you.
Yeah, that's true. And there's
think,
plenty
like,
of characters.
Be a great opportunity though, and we've talked about this I think before, where it's like, how are they going to reboot some of these characters that they've kind of put a pin in or phased out, and being that Loki is now like this internal tree, and that version of Loki is there, and we know that there are other Lokis in other dimensions because we've met them. Like this, that feels like a great character to kind of pilot like a relaunch before like we get to maybe some of the other, like before we get to Captain, bringing back Steve Rogers, like let's bring back Loki because that makes a lot of sense. And last question.
We'll see.
Yeah, one last question. What do you think we will see? That's my question. Is like,
when
do you think we're gonna see like, because obviously they always show all the things on the big board about like, oh, it's this is coming in 2027. It's like, and we don't have a Young Avengers as far as we know. Like, do you think
we don't? And I'm unsure. I really am unsure. I think the whole map of the MCU has probably been shaken up for both good and bad reasons over the last 2 years. So I'm really unclear, because I could see us getting a third season of WandaVision, which, if we count Agatha as a second season, that focuses on Wiccan searching for Tommy and maybe even looking for Wanda. Or we do that story and debut the Young Avengers at the same time and tell that story. And I don't know. Right now, there is nothing scheduled that makes it clear where that team is going to appear. I don't think they'll be in... Well, I guess they could be in Captain America New World Order. That feels a little fast for Wiccan, but maybe some of the other characters could be in there. The movie is called New World Order. True. And then there's Ironheart next summer. If they're going to put Ironheart on the team, then maybe that will start to get us further. Otherwise, we really have no idea. We have no idea when we're seeing America Chavez. We have no idea when we're seeing Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. Obviously, we don't know when we're seeing people like Patriot or Stature, Cassie Lang. And now we're all ready for Wiccan and eager for Wiccan. So I don't know the answer to when, but I hope it's soon. And
what about the Thunderbolts? Yeah. Do you think that's I mean, it's already been shot, but they could have shot it at the same time, bringing some of these characters in.
Well, one thing I think about Thunderbolts that Elliot and I have talked about a few times, and I'm sure people online are deep into, is the asterisk. And the asterisk is really interesting and important. And I think because Ryan Reynolds was doing all that Deadpool and Wolverine press and saying that they had intended to have the movie be like a fake out, and they had even gone so far as to get pretty close to having it be like a fake title of a movie, like having it really be a real absolute fake out, but realize like they just couldn't pull off a Beyonce with that. It makes me think, is Thunderbolts now like is what they were planning to do there repackaged as Thunderbolts? And what that would mean to me, if that's true, is that Thunderbolts could be any movie and we have no idea. Because if that's true, and it works well with Thunderbolts first issue, because of course Thunderbolts first issue, like you read the whole issue and you think you've met all these new characters and then suddenly you realize you haven't. So I'm like, if that's true, it could be Thunderbolts asterisk, actually it's Young Avengers. And maybe the Thunderbolts like are sort of backgrounded, you know, halfway through the movie and you get the Young Avengers team. Or, you know, it could be Thunderbolts asterisk, actually an Illuminati movie. Like there's all different things it could be. But Young Avengers is one potential because we don't know who the Thunderbolts are fighting or why they're fighting. We don't know anything about a conflict. And we have enough of the Young Avengers positioned around the world that, yeah, I think it's possible. That'd be a fun surprise. That means Young Avengers are debuting next May. All right.
I think the World Order is too serious, so I think, yeah. And then there's probably, if you probably did the real matchup, there's probably like White Widow could face off against Kate Bishop, right? Like you could draw the conspiracy lines to each person. I'm excited. Let's see.
Yeah. Oh, and Florence Pugh was in Hawkeye. That's right. That's fun.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, to be determined. So that is a wrap, dear watchers. Thank you for listening. I have been your dark floppy haired emo Wiccan Guido.
And I have been your, well, not green skinned, but blonde haired Rob.
The reading list is in the show notes. Please follow us on most social media at Dear Watchers.
Leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, in the words of Who Ought To, keep pondering the possibilities.